winter. Oh, and snow's forecast for the end of the week. But of course, the really big issue for me today was Brexit, the Brexit vote. Finally, after 4.5 years, Parliament has done what the British people instructed it to do. 4.5 years of obstruction, 4.5 years of attempting to nullify, to overturn the result of that referendum. And today, by a thumping majority, the new agreement, the new deal between us and the European Union has been approved, a majority of 458. I guess they did that because they knew the alternative would have been a clean break, no deal. I should, of course, tonight be filled with joy and elation that we've actually left now the single market, the customs union, we've left it all behind. And yet all I can feel is a sense of relief. Relief that it's happened, relief that we're out, but it's not joy because there are aspects of this deal that really are dreadful. The first, of course, is Northern Ireland. You know, we've put a part of the United Kingdom into a different constitutional arrangement to the rest of us. Northern Ireland has almost been hived off. And I think the consequences of doing that are going to make the battle to keep Scotland part of the UK just that little bit more difficult. That doesn't mean I think Scotland will leave the UK. I don't. But I do think giving them a separate status is going to add fuel to the fire that Nicola Sturgeon is building. The worst part of the deal for me is fisheries. I said at the time of the referendum and in the immediate aftermath that fisheries would be the acid test of Brexit. And I'm afraid the deal is shocking. Yes, we get back a little bit more quota over the course of the next 5 years. But the Prime Minister today just did not tell the truth in the House of Commons. Now, whether he has been badly briefed, whether he's actually read the document himself, I simply don't know. But he says after 2026, you know, we become an independent coastal state fully. The adjustment period, as they're now calling this, will be over and we can catch all the fish we want. Oh, no, we can't. We may call ourselves an independent coastal state. Monsieur Barnier may acknowledge we're an independent coastal state, but we still don't own the fish that swim within our exclusive economic zone. And after 2026, we will not be making sovereign decisions on who can catch what in British territorial waters. And I'm afraid to increase our quota share after 2026, we would actually have to pay compensation to the EU fleet. That's us paying them for our fleets to catch our fish in our waters. Surely it should be the other way round. They should be paying us to fish in our waters. So I think the fisheries aspect of this is little short of a humiliation. And perhaps the other point to note is that financial services, Britain's biggest industry, the sector in which we actually traded a surplus with the European Union, doesn't really get a mention. There are no agreements at all for services like financial services. So we have a deal that is good for BMW, good for the champagne makers, and good too for British exporters to Europe in the sense that there's no tariff, in the sense that there's no quota, but nothing for Britain's biggest individual industry. Against that, I do think it's right that we praise David Frost and indeed praise Boris Johnson, because this deal is so much better than that abject surrender negotiated by Mrs. May. Oh, did you see her today getting up in the House of Commons saying, oh, why didn't you vote for my deal? Well, because it was a sellout. The whole thing was a sellout, not just fisheries. Better she retired to Maidenhead, I think, and we never heard from her again. That's just my view. I wonder what you think to that. But the truth of it is, this is now not an EU treaty as the previous attempt was. It is an international agreement, a treaty between us and the European Union, but it's not an EU treaty. And that means that every aspect of it is not going to be adjudged by the European Court of Justice. And that actually is real, genuine progress. And it does make us independent in many, many ways. For example, we were able to make the decision about approving a vaccine weeks before the European Union could do it. Had we been an EU member, we couldn't have done that. And it does not commit us to regulatory alignment. And those that have followed what I've been doing in the last few years will know this was my main problem as we headed into the general election last year. And I was very clear. I said to the Conservative Party, if you promise there will not be regulatory alignment, we will withdraw our candidates against you in 319 seats. I was worried that in many of those seats, the Lib Dems perhaps could win. And if they did, a second referendum would have been upon us. They made that promise. Johnson, Gove and others made that promise. We would not commit ourselves to regulatory alignment, and we have not. And whilst there are provisions for the level playing field and a series of committees that will oversee the level of divergence that the UK makes from EU law, it's perfectly clear in the document that they would not even begin to think about acting in any way unless there were big material differences. And quite frankly, I think in 5 years' time, our patterns of trade with the rest of the world are going to be so different to what they are now that I'm less worried about what I saw as a sword of Damocles than I was before. So there are many aspects to this that are miles better than what Mrs May did. And you could argue that Boris Johnson inherited a bad hand and hasn't done a bad job of it. I first got really committed to the cause of us leaving the European Union back in the early 1990s, 30 years ago. And I've been campaigning and standing in elections and fighting for 27 of those years. So this does mark, for me personally, a very, very big moment in my life. There are more battles to fight in the future. I want to get the super trawlers out of the English Channel. I want us to find a way of returning people back to France when they come into this country illegally. There are many, many battles to fight, but the best thing about Boris Johnson's deal is this. It ends the fault line, not just within his own party, but it stops big industry bosses from continuing to scream and shout. It ends the Brexit wars, and it means that we're not going to rejoin the single market. We're not going to rejoin the customs union. We're not going to rejoin the European Union. We're certainly not going to join the euro. And there is now a widespread acceptance that this is done. It is the settled will of the people, and there is no going back. And that, even though the deal is not perfect, that is a giant leap forward for our country. So at 11 o'clock tomorrow night, I can't ask you to come back to Parliament Square because of COVID and Tier 4, but I can ask you to reflect on what is a very significant moment in our island story. And to say to many of you watching this, thank you. Because if it hadn't been for UKIP, none of this would have happened. Do you know, back in 93, when John Major rammed the Maastricht Treaty through, and when all those Tory MPs who'd fought against it then voted for it because they thought, oh, we mustn't let Labour in, there wasn't a single Conservative member of Parliament saying we should leave the European Union. And that's why UKIP was formed, and that's why UKIP got traction. And in fact, most of them didn't come out for leave actually until after the 2015 general election. It was UKIP over that quarter of a century. It was the foot soldiers of the People's Army of UKIP, people putting leaflets through doors, posters in windows, standing in local elections. That was what got us that referendum. That was what educated the great British public as to what was being done in their name in Brussels and by our politicians who wouldn't talk about it. And what the Brexit Party did was to pick up those same people again, to add more to it, and to get rid of Mrs May and to put Boris Johnson in number 10. And that really is the great historical significance of this vote today. We have got